a situation where Firestone is like a visitor overstaying his visit. While the idea behind the establishment of Firestone was a good thing, it was suitable for those days as far back as 1926. At that time also, Liberia, being what is considered as the stepchild of the great United States, was in its infancy stage. It was looking for Big Daddy in whatever way possible to lead it. So the story of Firestone was that to give at least slightly over 100 million acres of land to Firestone for the purpose of rubber plantations. The idea once again was a good one. But like many ideas that have come about in Liberia, they are good but lack practicality. When Firestone was established, the houses that they built for the employees were no different from the houses in which slaves in the American South dwelled. It was a clear example of the kind of a living condition that the slaves in the United States endured. It was pitiful. Also at the time, I was at the University of Akron. Firestone was still paying its employees somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 cents, $1 a day. That is even worse than some slaves who had certain kinds of opportunity in the United States. The condition then was deplorable, to say the least. Further, in what we consider at the time and age, to have Firestone still discriminate on the soil of Africa's First Republic, discriminating in terms of recreation centers, schools for the, of course, they never thought about providing education for the children of those who work for them, except a very minute number, if at all. Firestone also tried to give scholarships, at least on paper, but the government of Liberia also decided that for whatever inexplicable reasons, decided to channel all these scholarship programs through the government of Liberia, through what was considered the State Department. Golf was being played on Firestone Court, we're very rich. The lawyers for Firestone were the Richie Henrys and other prominent names in society. So clearly, to the minds of those downtrodden individuals, Firestone could never do anything wrong. And Firestone felt that to have these government officials on its side defending it certainly would never go wrong. And so clearly, the perpetuation of slave mentality and plantation mentality continued on Firestone, the plantations for as long as possible. It is regrettable that in the 21st century, only now Firestone is beginning, mind you, I said beginning, I didn't say it has begun, is beginning to take some corrective actions, and those were taken simply because the workers stood up to the test of Firestone. It is also working because the government apparently has matured a little bit to give the rights to the workers so that their earned services could be paid for. Because the name of the game is I provide my services, pay me adequate for it. And if you don't, then of course you have those people. As far as the 21st century, there's a small progress. But when you look at the history of Firestone, what he has done, how long he has been here, the progress is very, very minute. And it's not a thing that you can pat yourself in the back. But in fact, Firestone should be ashamed of the work that he has done in this country. Because of the rubber from here, the U.S. was able to build this military. Car makers were able to build their industries. In fact, because of Firestone, the city of Akron, Ohio, became known as the rubber capital city of the world. But yet, Firestone only got a latex out of here, took it to the U.S. Those things were supposed to have been produced here or could have been produced here in order to provide more jobs. And then again, if the workers who were tapping the rubber were getting something like 25 cents, 75 cents a dollar, I think it was better to take the latex out of here. Otherwise, it would have been making, who knows, 15, 10 cents, per day. So I think the work of Firestone has been dismal to me, to say the least. Commissioner, it's a moot question. Whether I was in the country or not, we plan it, we take credit, and we take criticisms for it. I think it was Bob Marley who said something like, "He who fights and runs away lives to fight another battle." Whenever we try to initiate any change in this country, in the back of our minds, it was only appropriate not to bring all your people in the forefront. There will have to be some people who keep the house, some people who come out with the research evidence to carry out certain things, and at some point in time, they will visit the front to make sure that things are going on right. Example was given regarding the question of Accra Peace Accord and how we follow it here. So, without not making you satisfied, I was in and out. How about that?
My question is, what are you in the country when the incident took place, and did not ask what you anticipated in the planning? I know by virtue of your membership of the organization, you are equally responsible. My question is, whether you were in the country at the time?
At the time April 14 occurred, we worked as a unit.
Yeah.
So whether 2 or 3 members of the union were here or not, to us, we never separated ourselves. Even though I may not have been here physically, but my presence was here.
Yesteryear, you were a student in the political activities. Today, you are a practicing politician, actively engaged in government activities. Yet, there are cries, or the cries for better services
postulated remain same today. That is, you had the constitution of this nation, which I believe was one of the finest, not only because it was a copycat of that of the United States, but the ingredients in practicing what was or what were enshrined in the Constitution were the good one. Where we went wrong is, in my opinion, what still exists today. Liberian government or people of Liberia are known to design perfect system, very good system. But the problem has been the practicality of that system. And so, in those days when the one-party state dominated, in order to change the system, you have to change the people in it. But regrettably, the people in it did not know anything about change, even though educationally and worldwide examples were all over, because it says if you don't change, change will change you at a pace that you never anticipated. And so we try as progressives to make the leadership aware that change was inevitable and that we should change and change peacefully. But when the highlanders in the Druid party put, and I felt sorry for President Torba because I think it was between the rock and the hard place. The highlanders tried to squeeze him not to change, because to them he was changing too fast, bringing about the rapid changes that were long overdue in this republic. So he went against their will. Finally, one of the major things that the Progressive Alliance wanted to change was the democratic process. Introduce the democratic process. And in my explanation, I mentioned so there were two men who profoundly impacted us, Clarence Parker and Honorable Joseph Chelsea, because when these men told us that it was going to be possible to establish another political system in this country, we were elated. And so through their help and through the prayers and our persistence, we brought about this change. Once again, may his soul give her back his rest of us, because he was a change agent through which we followed. Finally, we can read, in fact, the very existence of the TRC is a kind of change that we had envisaged long before. And so we are pleased to say that change that we advocated for is here. Now, second aspect is, what is the difference between change then and now? The democratic principle is a process. It's not an event. First and foremost, we are able to sit down freely and discuss our actions or inactions over the years, to express remorse, to express anger, and to have an entity established by a democratic government to listen to the cries of the Liberian people. And then maybe through this expression, they will be able to find, to design a better system for Liberia. I think the future might be a little bit better for the children through the process of the TRC and the good governance, because at least people will have the opportunity to air their views, to say what they think, knowing or keeping in mind that freedom itself is not free, and be able to take responsibility for what they say and do, and be able to be a man or a woman present day, and I'm working in the government currently, I think change does take place if you allow that. I give you the example in my explanation. In 1974, or rather 79, when we requested the government to march to express our views, had the government given us the opportunity, then what happened here on September 27 would have happened. That is, we requested the government of Ellen Johnson Sirleaf to give Mr. Vargas Matthews a grassroots funeral from Bull Road to the principal streets, the very principal streets we had asked for in 1974-79. We marched. People with children, ladies with babies on their back. People were selling their oranges or whatever they could sell. There was not an iota of disturbance in any shape or form. I was in the floor. Many of the people today, many of the progressives went with us. 2 nights of wakekeeping at the ATS also saw a similar result. So if you let the citizens, they give them their freedom that is enshrined in the Constitution, let them take care of themselves, I think we'll have a result such as the one I just quoted to you. So I think what is happening now is a process. We cannot say this is where it ought to be. No. There is always room for corrections, room to look at certain things that happen and how you can correct them. And I think that this government and hopefully subsequent governments will look at this example and give the people the freedom to assemble, to free speech, to travel, and so that they can exercise these rights which are given to them by God and substantiated by the Constitution of the Republic. It's a progress.
That only has funding
Sorry?
Strong executive of PDP or United Party. And my understanding is you are the current chair. Your party participated in the 1977 election. In your general testimony.
77 or 97?
97. At the same election, in your general testimony, you said that you came along with President Johnson as a strategist. How come when you belong to a party, to that party is standing, and then you started for another party? How will you say when your credibility and fidelity to your party is in question?
Thank you. In politics, there are usually 3 principles. You, as an individual in a political party, you have your own principles. Then you have the principles of the political party of which you are a member. Then you have the country's principle or interest. You will recall that in true democracies the world over, people who have been interested in the development of their countries have always, 99% of the time, supported the principles and therefore the interest of the nation. Because if it all boils down to it, the country is most important, or the principles of the country is most important. is the Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan Democrats. Yes, it did not mean that they are not Americans. They were certainly are Americans. They were and are Americans. But if you saw that the problems of the United States could be better solved by Ronald Reagan, Democrats crossed over and voted for Ronald Reagan twice. We also had Republicans who worked for the Bill Clinton White House. And the list goes on and on. Because these people are more interested in the unity, cohesiveness, and the principle for which the United States stands than party principles. So he was with Madam Annie Johnson said, let me tell you what happened. I was contacted, but I have come here in March 1997 to bury my late brother Jimmy Dahn. And at the time, I was asked by the late Dogolia whether I would like to become an important member of the TIDA government. And the pressure was mounting, so anyway, I told them that I would, but I had to go to the States and pack my things and come. That's a way of getting out. And when I went back to the States, Mrs. Salif contacted me. In fact, it was Dr. Sam Abdullah family and I who were contacted. We went to Maryland in the house. We met Dr. Charles Clark. We had a discussion, and then there was a big meeting in which we were asked to come to Liberia to help solidify our position. At the time, while she was there, she remained there until the party she helped to form, which is the Liberian National Party, sort of got rid of her. And the party's leadership, or the Senator was Senator, now Senator Peter Watson. And so we wanted to come back because we saw in her the possibility of, again, mending the parts of Liberia that has been split. And you will also recall that because of the 7-point or 12-point plan that we carried to Abuja, in which it was requested that maybe, just maybe, a woman being given this position in this hard time, Liberians, respect for their mothers, they will give a lady a chance to mend the fences and conduct elections. And just because of that, and again, we are not claiming responsibility, sole responsibility or credit for this. Mrs. Ruth Perry was selected by the committee, and she saw exactly what we have said, if I be the case, by administering the elections here without herself taking part in it. We don't know whether the men would have done it, but you will recall that there were 3 or 4 men before that, and it was not possible. So, armed with this success, it was only right for us to come back again, taking into consideration setting Liberian first to support another female candidate again to take us away from the war years and the war mentality, and hopefully lead us into a peaceful setting during which time we think that it would be ready for the boys to come in, quote unquote. So when I came here, it was not a secret. I went to my party headquarters. I explained to the late G. Bacchus Matthews, and the party headquarters was jam-packed, that I have come to try to help bring some sanity to the insane situation. And I thought that just as Mrs. Perry has so far at the time held the country and the warring factions at bay, so too I think that the first 6 years of another female will be helpful to us. And that I was not joining any political party No, I was not joining any other political party, but rather taking the interests of the country most important to all other interests. And since there were no differences, in my view, in the principles and policies of Marcus Matthews or any other candidate for that matter, and Mrs. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, I thought that this was the best way to go. Yes, I received criticisms, but then, of course, you know, you are into the business. It's not a popularity contest. So if you have the opportunity to look into the future and see what can be done, and we have ample evidence that it would be possible for a female to bring us to this level. You go to the formation of the State of Israel. Golda Meir was the first female. Look at India, trying to bring a diverse ethnic groups, diverse persuasion, political and economic persuasions together. It was not an easy thing. And nobody ever said that it would be easy. So you look at these examples of the world, and you look at your own situation. What you do, you borrow from these countries, customize what you think would be available, would be good for your country, and then you take the gamble. So what we did was exactly that. And I don't have to tell you, Mr. Commissioner, the result is what we are enjoying today. Process of democracy.
In answering to a question that we gave you at the beginning, try to find out whether you were in the country when April 14 took place. Say it doesn't matter. The matters is that the planning was done by you and you were operating on the basis of joint interest. So, but the same principle, you said you became a spokesman for INPFL. Can we then assume that what happened in NPFL from the time you became the spokesman, you are equally responsible being a member, an official of our reflection?
Well, I don't know what you mean, an official.
Spokesman.
I was asked by Mr. Johnson, and I felt that just as every Liberian was looking, every meaningful Liberian was looking for ways to bring the carnage to an end, I thought that Mr. Johnson would listen to me. And I'm glad he did listen to me. I was not in the country, but I'm glad he listened to me. Because after we formed the Government of National Unity in Banjul, which was hosted by you and others, we also had to find means by which we can quiet everybody down. I try to use my NIMBA connection. I talked to the late Sam Doki and those that he brought with him. And I also talked to Noah Bordolo, Yomi, and I think Samuel Vani and all the other people. And the discussion centered around specifically bringing this carnage to an end, that there's no winner in it. Giving them Lebanese, the example in Lebanon, and so on and so forth. And so now that I was glad that they had participated even in an observatory position in the formation of a government in exile, it was only appropriate that I would ask them to lay down their arms. So if you say because of that action, I'm therefore responsible for what happened, I don't know what you mean by that question. But yes, I'm a member of, I was a spokesman to bring the war to an end, not a registered member of this, of this group. But yes, I did my best in order to bring it to an end. And like I said in my deliberation, everything I told Mr. Johnson to do in terms of obeying what the ECOMO people were saying and laying down his arms, he did exactly that. So I'm pleased that I was a part of bringing that particular thing to an end.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dahn, for your presentation. You have given a lot of information from 1979 up to the end of the Civil War, and you made recommendation for the way forward. But one information that you never mentioned anything about, I would like to ask you some question in that regard, if you had any information. You know, you talk about the rest trial, and then up to the time the PL started to resign from the Dahn government, which was 1983. But prior to that, there was this Nimba raid. Do you have any information as to what really happened in Nimba?
Well, the only information I have was received peripherally. It was in September that I heard a number of stories. First, the late Samuel Doki and others were trying to stage a coup. Well, to me, I don't know whether this was the case. Why would you stage a coup almost 200 miles away from the seat of government? What was the purpose? And so I never figured out what the purpose was. The second aspect had to do with the late General Say, who was the first superintendent of Nimba County upon the coming of the People's Redemption Council. We heard that General Say was trying to assassinate Thomas Kumba after Tom had already fallen out with Mr. Dahn. All of these things, as a researcher, I'm very careful. You got to take some of these things with a grain of salt. So, knowing the Liberian society, when you have somebody coming from a scene to tell you a story, you have to be exceptionally careful, because chances are that he was not there in the first place. But when he's telling you this story, he makes it look like he was standing right there when this was occurring. And so I never really believe any of these stories. The only thing I believe was when Kumba and Mr. Dahn fell out, after Kumba was demoted, and whether the raid in Nimba and General Say's own action, which by the way he did not survive because he died also, he got killed there, were related. I'm not able to tell you exactly whether this is true or not. So the information I got is as good as what you got.
So General Say was in Nimba at the time?
The Nimba raid took place before General Say went later, I think a few months later.
Thank you very much. The action was actually based on the fact that we did extensive work in research. For example, the rest riot, nobody ever came here before to tell us exactly. They told us that there was research, the PAL presented document as to the amount, the price of records that time. Maybe the first person who gave her that figure. So knowing that, I thought you have had some in-depth information as to what caused the Nimba raid, who were responsible for the Nimba raid. Thank you. And then coming to 1983, You see, about the 30th of April 1983, most of the PAL members who were in government at that time resigned from government based on the fact that former President Dahn asked all those who were interested in political position to resign. And knowing from other people who came to this commission to testify that PAL never participated in the election, can you tell us, as executive of PAL, why didn't PAL participate? I understand that Boja was banned, but PAL never participated in the election.
Thank you. The situation with PAL was one of those most outrageous events in Liberia. When the time came for registration, almost everybody, every political party at the time registered. The United People's Party, by the way, we take our hats off to the late D12 because he proposed his party was the United People's Party, and this was introduced to us by Mr. Oscar Quia. The United People's Party presented the largest requirements in the amount of over 300,000 United States dollars in property, bonds, and so on and so forth at the time. Seeing this sort of momentum that this organization had gained in this republic, the memberships, if you were to ask, let me digress for a second, if you were to ask many of the political parties today, they got their genesis from the Progressive Alliance of Liberia. They don't PPP or UPP. Many members, many individuals were members of this party. But back in 1983, when we registered with the largest amount, it was one of the most unbelievable political decisions that we ever come to know. Out of the clear blue sky, as far as I'm concerned, in our party headquarters meetings, which we had right here, opposite the old Supreme Court on Buchanan and Broad Streets, we were banned. And according to the late Ambassador Emme Hammer, we had these socialistic tendencies. We were grown-up boys banned on bringing chaos, grown-up boys who have never learned how to run a country. But then, of course, this is an interesting one. I'll leave it there. But we never were given the opportunity to participate, so they banned us. And we think that they banned us because of the split that had already taken place in the progressives, in that you had some members of the progressives who, because of their ethnic association with the power that be, they would deny those who were not members of this ethnic group. And secondly, for Mr. Dahn himself to become president, and since he counted very much on the kinsmen, the best thing to do was to align himself with those who were in his favor, including the soldiers. And since many of the progressives who were soldiers were just about no longer in the government, I'm talking about people like Winston, Thomas Winston, Henry Zuo, Nelson Toh, J.V. Tubman, Colossus Gonya, Thomas Kruba himself, and General Say. Tom was still alive, but the rest of the people have been killed for one reason or another. Power or position has been secured. And so, therefore, the remnants of us pose no threat. So I believe it was based upon that and other personal assessments they made, I believe for fear of the progressives, because I believe that if we had been allowed to have for United People's Party to participate, we would have won. We would have won overwhelmingly because we did a prediction based upon assessment that we did and examples of similar elections around the world. We would have won, overwhelmingly. So those who advised, though, to get rid of us out of the government, were right. We're right because what they said certainly would have happened. So it was that Mr. Dole, President Dole, or CRC Dole, decided to use Diman's system in the Togo at the time to come up with this statement of trying to be politicians to resign their government appointed positions so that they would prepare themselves to get involved in the electoral process. Well, what it really said was that getting rid of them would shut them off and they would not be a party to this. Or the number one reason we believe was that if we had not accepted that to resign, Doe would have said, well, nobody is in this country that is ready now to take over the leadership, so we will wait until somebody else comes along, and that's a long way out. So we decided to risk our lives by resigning as he has indicated, and we did, and we have no regrets for resigning. But the reason was simply to shut us off and make sure that we don't participate, that if we did, we will win. And that would have been bad for the government at the time.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and please accept my sympathy for the experiences you had during the course of the conflict.
Thank you, madam. Talking about my experiences, I don't like to talk about it because it is one of the most painful experiences I have ever had in this country. And as a Lutheran, we are not too vociferous about this kind of experience. Otherwise, we'll put on our shoulder and let people know how much we are suffering. But it's regrettable. But we also believe that it was done by our brothers and sisters who probably at the time did not know better or overreacted. We hope that this will not be repeated.
Good afternoon, Dr. Dahn.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for coming. My first question, I asked a member of the Progressive, Mr. Wisse, who was testifying here yesterday, the same question. I'm asking you, I will ask you the question again because I want to really understand what was behind the psychology of the message that was preached by the Progressives, and then also how it was interpreted by the ordinary people or the masses for whom you were fighting. From your testimony and the testimonies of others who have come before you, basically other progressives who have come before you, you seem to I don't want to say heal, but you seem to acknowledge for yourself that you thought that what you did at the time was heroic, and you did what you thought you were doing the best interest of the country. Well, maybe you did. I'm not here to judge that. But there's another side of the argument that we hear all around here, and I'm sure some of you have heard that side of the argument as well. That the progressives, your message was, because it was not properly tailored, and because you were speaking, or you were trying to work with people who really didn't understand the politics of the time and what you were trying to get across. And so there's the opinion that you preyed upon the vulnerability and ignorance of the population at the time, or quote unquote the masses, as you called them then. And so you preyed upon their vulnerability and the ignorance, and you gave them all this message that quote unquote incited them. Like for example, there is a comment that people were told that Liberia was so rich, the country has so much riches, that nobody need to be poor. That their grandparents had paid taxes for them in the past, that they didn't even have to pay taxes themselves, but that just a handful, a clique of Liberians were benefiting from the wealth of the country to the detriment of the majority of Liberians. And that you needed a change of government because the government was corrupt, etc., etc. And the argument here is that the message was that the timing was wrong. You had a population that was not prepared, that had not been exposed, that was also ignorant as to what was happening politically as well. And so the message was ill-timed. I would like for you to comment on that, on those criticisms. And also, my next question, you spoke about Mr. Matthew in a very fond way, and a lot of you from the progressive era, especially those of you who worked with him very closely, speak very fondly of him. But I think I can recall that it was sometime in 1999 or 2000, Mr. Matthews was removed, I would say removed from the leadership of the party because he refused, because he took issue, and I think a lawsuit ensued after. What happened then? What happened to this man who should have been the father of your party, the father of your movement, who was so popular, who was so well loved? Everyone is eulogizing him, and then you had this big squabble over the leadership of the UPP at the time. So I will ask you more questions when you answer the two questions.
Thank you, Madam. These are very two important questions, so I don't know whether I should start with the last one or whatever. We practice what we preach. Mr. Matthews was the founding father of the Progressive Alliance of Liberia from 1974 to continue in 2000 or 1999. Don't you think at this point in time it was inevitable that you change the leadership peacefully? That's exactly what happened. Of course, every time we have wanted to have our party congress, the country was in total chaos. So when we saw the window of opportunity to change the leadership democratically, we cannot be preaching democracy while practicing dictatorship. So it was only appropriate in 1999 to change the leadership. It was not a disgraceful changing of leadership. In fact, far from it. So in 1999, Party Congress elected Mr. Wesley Momo Johnson as our party leader. Again, it's a 2-year position. But because of the uncertainty and the war in Liberia, and everything that makes this place look kind of ungovernable. It was delay and delay and delay until 2004, when we had our elections, the Congress in Greenville, during which time I won the leadership position as the chairman of the Progressive, or rather, chairman of the United People's Party. We continued to interact with Mr. Matthews. He was our chairman emeritus, and he gave us advice. But again, in the Progressive Alliance, or rather in the United People's Party, one of the neat things that keep us together is the freedom to criticize leadership based upon the information that you have, and the willingness of the leadership to accept the criticism, because he knows that, like every human being, we are not infallible. We make our mistakes. So if he's going wrong, his ability to accept that he's going wrong makes a difference. In some other political parties, no. You never hear about that. You form a party with a standard bearer, everything there must go according to you. No, this is not unique to, it's not the way that the United People's Party operates. It's a party from the grassroots, and sometimes if you visit our headquarters, you hear the grassrooters using words that are not pleasant on the leadership because they were mad. Our ability is to sit down and listen to what they say. In most cases, they have a point, but because we have heard, which is human, we have to listen to them and apologize. Okay, apologizing to the people that you lead is probably one of the most humble things you can ever do. Because in the party, we used to have another saying called, you either lead, you follow, or you get out of the way. So if you're going to lead, all of these things are going to come to you. And people are going to pick up cases. Sometimes they got no truth to it, but your ability to listen to them is what made this party unique. So with the what you consider the removal or unceremonial removal of Marcus Matthew, no, that was not the case. We went through a party congress, and he decided also not to run for fear that, for the fact that he had been in there since the formation of the party. We have never had a time to have a party congress, and now this was the opportunity. So it was an honorable thing to do, and we hold in very high regard for that. With the situation regarding change agent, I think during my deposition, I may have said something regarding change. And nobody was ever born with any particular tattoo on his or her back that you're going to be a change agent, you're going to be a president, you're going to be this, you're going to be that. No. To change the system that existed here, after 150 some more years, you had the same very people, their children, children's children, and so on and so forth, continue to run the country. If you were running the country in a way that everybody benefited from it, from the natural resources, from the labor, educating the people. Because in the history of the world, no country has ever developed without an educated mind. But education was paid nothing but lip service, while they continue to borrow from foreign governments. The money was brought in here, they built houses, and they turn right around and lease those very houses to the very people they borrow money for. without any checks and balance. You give an open, give me a blank check. So it was appropriate for this blank check mentality to stop. We did not appoint ourselves. And you will recall that in the history of the world also, changes have been brought about by university students mostly, by people who got nothing to lose. First of all, they don't have the education. Second, they don't have the wealth. Third, they are not even working. Because those who have all of these things here are the ones that control the government. So how can they bring change? How can they bring about change against themselves? So it was only logical for those whose future was to be determined, according to President Tauber, the precious jewel's future. We had to come up with some form to change the system, change it for the better for all of us. You will also recall that during this period, the economy of this country was being compared, even though I think inaccurately they said the standard of living of Liberians were compared to that of Japan or West Germany at the time. Another study was done which proved, and it was called growth without development. Why it is true that there was money here, why it is true that all these companies were operating and a lot of money was coming from royalties. The question is, where are the finished projects? The finished projects we can identify today will be the executive mansion, which the Israelis built for $90 million, and the Temple of Justice. But to be in power for this long, for the economy to be booming, to be closely associated with the world's most advanced nation, the United States, for a laissez-faire policy in learning to this country to be implemented, and we still did not have the payrolls. It was very shameful. For education, Liberia, mind you, Liberia was very instrumental on the international scene. Championed the independence of other countries. Oh yes, Liberia was good. The formation of the Organization of African Unity through the meeting between Sekou Touré and Osagyefo Nkrumah in Saniko in 1959. Liberia taking the South African government to the World's Court for the apartheid system. Liberia championing all the countries that were independent or that were trying to gain their independence. At some point in time, even Nelson Mandela was a citizen of this country. Miriam Makeba, Hugh Masekela, all of these were citizens of this country. Liberia was shining in the international scene. But homegrown, no. The money was coming in, maybe to help champion the cause. The money was coming in from these operations in the country. But since you did not have any check and balance system, you did not have anybody to question where was this money going. It was only appropriate for those in power to use it at will, while neglecting education, probably the most important any social service that any government can offer. The University of Liberia, according to only two institutions here, the professors were hardly being paid. But then the question is, where did that money go? So it was appropriate for somebody to step up to the plate. And since we had nothing to lose, we're not glorifying ourselves. No, far from it. Far from it. You got to read the world history to find out how change has been brought about, even in the great United States. When the Americans landed there, and they tried to break away from the British. Yeah, they were called rebels, revolutionaries, uncivilized. So we are not surprised for these names to be coming to us. But it was inevitable that we brought about a change that would benefit all Liberians in the future. We made sure that the principle of democracy, you see, the essence of democracy is a free competition of ideas. The only reason why you sit on power is because you don't want to compete, either because you are inept or you don't know what it is you're doing, or you don't want anybody to challenge you. So the progressives believe that if you really say you were elected by 99.9% of your vote, prove it to the citizens. And it was very difficult for people not to even foresee the future. You had a growing population of youngsters here. Scholarships were also discriminated because only those whose parents were in government received the scholarships. So much so that the State Department, now the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, decided and explained this to governments who were giving scholarship, that all scholarships should come through the State Department. When the government will give you the scholarship, and when the government will tell you what it is that you must study. That was one of the reasons why some of us decided. It took me about 2 years to make that $500 and to give it. And some of my fathers, I would call them, you know, they chip in here and there to get the $500 to deposit before I could be giving my student visa to go away. But when these things are continuously happening in a country, and we are not going backward, we are going forward, then it's time for any group of persons to step to the plate. And that's exactly what we did. So we are not glorifying what it is that we did, but we are glad that through the efforts, through the blood and sweat of comrades, individuals who were unmercifully slaughtered, who were tortured, who lavished in jail, whose bodies were dismembered, we are happy that they died for a cause. And that cause was to have an elected government. An elected government that will appoint or legislate an entity such as the Truth and Reconciliation, for people to come out and say what they did and express remorse for what they did, so that this country can move forward. You know, I was sitting there listening to Julieta Okowape. It's a Swahili word. It means, Julieta, where are you? When this music was playing, I was still in elementary school. And to go see the movies, basically to listen to this music, it was 25 cents or 15 cents. Liberians, we're human beings. But we are not. We are human beings right now in the form we are. But what has happened in this country is a horrible one. And we have to admit, that's why I propose that those in the True Party should also take somewhat to the plate and tell the public what it is that they did to this country, the violence that they introduced to this country, and then their successors, at least the two major successors, carry out, even compared to what they did was a baby play. So we need to reconcile, madam. We need to really reconcile. But reconciliation, again, is a two-way street. You have the progressives come here and tell you what they did and express remorse. What about the perpetrators? People who introduced violence in this country. Violence, I'll give you an example of my own father, Horace, Whiteman family, senior that is, David Coleman, even going as far back as the early 1800s, Edwin J. Roy. Why? Because there was not a system to balance the actions or inactions of the leaders in power. So let me say this: we are not glorifying. We are sincerely sorry because we are men. We also err. We are human beings. We err. We regret for the loss of lives. But as I said to you, in a Christian country, the president, the timing was right. I must admit, because I did research, the timing was perfect. President Talbot was president of the Baptist World Alliance. He was also president of Africa's First Republic, soon to be chairman of the brainchild of Sekou Touré, Nkrumah, and Tubman, the Organization of African Unity. So we expected overreactions. We expected the usual: beating, taking people to prison, and so on and so forth. But shooting directly into an unarmed crowd, this is where I went wrong, and I also regret that, because I never anticipated that this would happen. So change, we must change in order for the country to move forward, because if we don't change, change will change us.
Which brings me to my next question. From various testimonies and also from accounts some of us have heard, Mr. Matthews insisted on holding the rights demonstration anyhow against the pleas, for example, of Mr. Albert Port, who was trying to negotiate between the would-be demonstrators and the government. But the government was equally recalcitrant as well. We've heard this other side of the story, and I would just like you to comment whether you heard anything, whether you know whether it's true or not, that Mr. Matthews insisted on holding the demonstration anyhow because he knew he had the government back up against the wall. Like you just stated, they were planning for the OAU conference here. Talbot was the chair. He was the president of the World Baptist Alliance. So he had all these profiles. And one, it was the perfect time to embarrass him. And two, the government was weak because they had people from the inside consider the people from the right wings who thought Talbot was too flexible, so they wanted him out. So it created the perfect opportunity. But more so, it has been whispered in certain quarters that Mr. Matthews was prepared for the demonstration because he knew the government would react with force. So he prepared some of his boys. Secretly, he gave some of them arms without the knowledge of some of the organizers of the demonstration. Can you just comment?
Well, thank you. There is a saying that you make your tomorrows by the things you do today. What Mr. Matthews, as leader of the progressive forces in this country, did was exactly to prepare what the today will be, what the tomorrows will be. But to say that because he felt that the government was weak or the government's back was on the walls is to say that, well, you know, this is not time to change. It was it's another way of saying that, well, don't hold on yet, you know, change will come, will bring change, will bring about change after the OAU or after whatever event it is. doesn't work out that way. You can't have your cake and eat it too. We felt that change was long overdue in this country. So we chose a time that we felt, and I think in my deposition you also will read there, that there were vacillations from the government negotiator. In fact, they were arrogant. You know, who are you, grown-up boys to sit down and negotiate the future or demonstration with grown-up boys? Even though the evidence presented to them as enshrined in the Constitution, that we have the right to demonstrate against this government. Okay? To express our views, it is enshrined in the Constitution. So you can't tell me, well, we're not ready yet. Oh, really? When will you be ready? After 150 years, when will the citizens have the right to demonstrate against you because it is your policy that has driven them into poverty? It is your policy that has denied them, or rather kept them in educational and developmental darkness. When would you do that? So we believe the time was right. But it's not that we just got up and decided to demonstrate. As I say, more than a month's negotiations went on. And all the president should have done, all those who were so involved in seeing to it that the grown-up boys, quote-unquote, were eliminated, was to come out with something that was meaningful. The evidence was there. The PL 480 rights was not being purchased by government, but instead government was making money off of this. So it was appropriate to go out with a demonstration at the time, because those who hold to the view that the president was weak at the time is like telling George Washington, or the British telling George Washington, at the Boston Tea Party, we give you freedom, but just give us at least 100 years. No, that's not possible. If you want freedom, you must be prepared to go for it. And we knew, as we know today, that if change is not being made in the democratic process, if it continues to remain stagnant, then again one of the laws and phases will come about, which is the equilibrium stage. You can push people so far and so much, they get to a certain stage, they would rather die than to be pushed again. So we thought after 150 some more years, or 40 some more years at a time, change was not coming. Group of no-gooders, grown-up boys, we helped to bring about it. We didn't care who brought about it. Whether you were from the university, you were a grown-up boy, or you were a farmer. In fact, people who feed the pain are the poor. And so we came from a poor background. And we wanted to make sure that change was brought about. Because again, in the accounts that I presented to you, if you prefer, read Gus Liebman's book, The Evolution of Privilege, and put yourself in the shoes of those who had nothing to do in this government. Another book that I would subscribe to you is the one written by one Stephen, a South African, Hlope, H-L-O-P-E, The Class and Ethnicity of Monrovia. The struggle between the topman and the tallman, and so on and so forth. You will find enough evidence there to tell you that change was long overdue. So in closing on this particular question, no, it was not that. In fact, just the opposite. We thought President Tubman, or Tallman rather, was strong. He was progressive. He was speedo. So we thought that he would welcome this. Of course, there are some people in other quarters who say that it was the hardliners in the True Party And I tend to believe it also. But it was not his weakness, it was in fact his strength. And as I mentioned, if he had allowed the demonstration to go on, just as Mississippi did, you would have seen similar results. I guarantee that.
Okay, thanks for trying to provide clarification, but I was actually asking if you knew anything about whether Mr. Matthews armed some of the demonstrators that morning, because there are all these varying accounts about who fired first, who shot the first gun, whether it was the police, the government, or whether it came from the crowd.
My sincere apology. Armed. Where we poor Bruna boys get their arms from? Where we people who, according to the power that be, we have no future, we are empty drunks, get their arms from? None of us were working, we're not working for anything. Where will we get our arms? I have stated in my deposition unequivocally that the Progressive Alliance of Liberia, UPP, never ever purchased, own any arms in any shape or form, never ever advocated any armed struggle. The only arm that we had is the arm that we all have today, the Constitution of the Republic of Liberia. When you are armed with the government's own saying, you cannot change it. It's the same thing that people like Martin Luther King did, quoting the Constitution of the United States before the U.S. Congress. It's the same Constitution that George Washington explained to the British the freedom to have a freedom, and that we knew that we're not going to have freedom on a silver platter. This was George Washington and his colleagues. It's the same freedom or the same arm that freedom fighters, I'm not talking about pseudo freedom fighters or people who take out arms against the government or citizens because they want to quote, liberate, unquote. But the arm that we had is the arm that we have today. The free competition of ideas, democracy, the freedom for people to think freely, to behave freely, the freedom to be given your right as a citizen, the freedom that when you work for somebody, you should get paid equitably. This is what we're armed with. And this is what the government was afraid of, because they felt that it had nothing against this particular arm, because they themselves were armed with the arm that we had. So no, there was never anything like physical, a gun or whatever that were taking that time. No, not to my knowledge.
You spoke about some of the problems that you were having, and when I'm speaking you, not you as an individual, but members of the Progressives at the time, you spoke about some of the problems you were having in the PRC government that led to the resignation of some of your colleagues. And you also said there were some of the members of the Progressives who aligned with the late Samuel to the Master Sergeant Joe at the time because of ethnicity, which brings to mind the question, over the years we've seen where members of the Progressives who initially started off with oneness of purpose go apart. We saw varying or different groups of members of the Progressive align in sub-cliques, and that was manifested in the 1997 elections, where I think we had 13 parties, and a lot of the members from the Progressive era were competing against each other. We had Mr. Bowling who was running, Churchy who was running, Family was running, Charleston, and all these people, and these are people who worked together before, fighting for social justice for the country. My question here is, how much has this competing interests contribute, the competing interests amongst progressives, how much has it contributed to what happened in this country in terms of the conflict and where we are today?
Thank you. I think you have two ways of looking at this. And let me repeat myself. The formation of these different political parties, different interests. While it is true that I do not really agree with the numbers of political parties, I welcome the idea that you could have as many Liberians running for the same position in the different political parties. Because again, that's the essence of democracy, the free competition of ideas. May the best person win. So if you look at it from that point of view, I think it's healthy. Very, very healthy. As far as whether it has contributed negatively to the problems that we face today, I think it would be very difficult to just lay the blame on the political party or the politicians per se, because the devastating results we have today did not come through a political struggle. Like parties went to, they went to elections, somebody won, and the rest fell into the camp of the losers and therefore tried to unseat the government. No, that's not the case. The problem that we have today came from a military one, which was starting from Samuel Doe, and then later on he became president, served in that position for 10 years, and then it was exacerbated by Mr. Taylor, who came in December 1989. This is where the devastation really took place. So it was not a politician. Of course, we are also aware that in the history of mankind, in any war for that matter, only 10% is fought on the battlefield, and 90% seeks political solution. And so that is the reason why the war was going on. The politicians were finding ways to bring this situation to an end on the political table. So using Kwame Nkrumah's phrase, let me just paraphrase this: seek ye first the political consolidation, and other things shall be added unto you. So while the war was raging on, politicians were attending conferences in order to bring the war to an end before what I mentioned earlier could take place. Free competition of ideas, forming different political parties. So in reality, I think the politicians did their part. They played well, they did well in difficult circumstances. And I think that it was only appropriate if they wanted to be president of Liberia, wanted to be ministers, or wanted to be whatever in Liberia, to bring the political stability that the country needed before they can take on whatever positions they wanted to run for. So I think this was done. It was done properly, and I don't think that they should be held accountable for the carnage or the reactions of the war that we experience today. I don't know if that answers your question. If not,
not a little bit, but I would like you to elaborate some more, but I will just make a brief clarification. I wasn't limiting my question just to the elections of 1997 and the rotating parties with almost all progressive members running for the ultimate post, which was the presidency. I just used that as one example. But I'm looking at instances where, for example, you had members of the progressives who worked together before, now on different competing ends. Like, for example, you had Mr. Wu, he formed his own armed group. Mr. Superwood, all these people. Then you had Dr. Bole, who formed his armed group, the LPC. And you have all these different interests. You have some people siding with Mr. Johnson, at the time, General Prince Johnson. Then, of course, you have Mr. Taylor, who brought the NBFL in. You had some members of the progressive who were split and loyal to him. And these were the same people, a lot of the times, that form majority of the people who were negotiating at the peace conferences. And it was obvious you were on different sides. So you were on different sides. Some of you were with warring factions. So definitely you were going to be pushing different agendas. Agendas of your side you are representing, whether warring factions, whether political party or what have you. So it is against that background that I ask you a question: how much has the competing interest amongst progressives? When I say progressive, I limit it to progressive because you are a progressive and we're speaking with you from that background. Could be anybody else, could be any other group. Maybe I will ask the same question when another group comes, but we are reviewing the progressives now. So it is against that background that I'm asking the question: how much has this competing interest and competition amongst you, for example, prolonged the war? Like you had Mr. Wu and the rest of them who were with Taylor pushing for something else. You had another group here with Dr. Sawyer and the interim government pushing for something else. Another group with pushing for something else. And we had more than 23 peace accords and several interim governments.
Well, let me say this much about the progressives. Even twin brothers don't think alike. Progressives, because we are progressives, does not necessarily mean that we all think alike. We all like the same thing. We all want to do the same thing at the same time. The progressives are mostly interested in bringing about change progressively. When that change comes, when that opportunity presents itself, any progressive who wishes to compete is free to do so. Whether during the 1997 elections, you could have had Mr. Matthews' own brother to run against him. Again, that's the essence of democracy. You could have had Mr. Quia run against Mr. Matthews. Again, because in the progressives, you have elections. You have elections, and the best person who wins then becomes your standard bearer. Let me give you a little bit of history about what happens in the United People's Party that is different from other parties. As I alluded to in the, previously, in the United People's Party, the chairmanship and members of the executive, vice chairman, and so on and so forth, they go through debates. If I want to be a chairman, I'm running against somebody. We have an elections commission. We debate the issues. Members listen. They question whether you will be able to take this party from point A to point B. They thoroughly question you, look at your background, your contributions, and what it is that you say ties in with the country, the development of the Republic of Liberia. How your thinking is in line with the Constitution of the Republic of Liberia. When you win that, and you are elected as chairman, the executive committee members are elected, then to go for the presidency, you have to compete again. You have to win the votes. I give you my own example. Mr. Milton Teje and I competed here in 2004 for the senior bearership of the party. We went all over this country, town to town, county to county. At the end of it, we were victorious 65% of the time. In a situation that you feel that you have touched, you have come in contact with the people. Not that Mr. Milton Teje is not a progressive, not that I'm not a progressive. So it's the same thing that came about in 1997. After bringing about a peaceful solution or resolution to the conflict, the progressives decided that they should form their own political parties. And I mentioned earlier also that many of these parties are the offsprings of the United People's Party. And we are proud that when you have a child, the child grows up, he wants to be a man, he wants to be a woman, let him go. Okay? So it's like the philosophical saying that if you love a thing, set it free. If it doesn't come back to you, it never was yours. If it comes back to you, it was yours. So the progressives, despite the fact that they have formed different political parties to contest the elections, the idea remains the same. I think this is what has bound us together for all these years. Change, democratic change. And so we are not a bundle of twins that we must think alike, we must therefore act alike. No, that is not the case. So whatever it is that they have done in the latter years, I think it should be to the credit of the comrades who paid for it with their lives. You know, by giving the freedom to form political parties, to do whatever they want to do within the context of the law, and thereby progressing the progressive ideas.
Thank you very much. I would just like to make a comment. I'm done with my questioning. I mentioned the change of leadership of Mr. Matthews from the party because I remember it was a very heated debate amongst members of your party. Some of whom I know very well and I spoke to. The party was split and Mr. Matthews took each matter to court. I think it was a court action, wasn't it? It was a lawsuit. It was a lawsuit over his removal. I think he took the Congress, your party Congress to court. So it wasn't like it was just a friendly democratic process and he just turned over naturally and everything. You know, something was wrong there, but that's not the argument today. I just wanted to just state that we followed the argument at that time, and I knew that it was a bitter struggle for Mr. Matthews to let go of the party's leadership, and that there were some members of the party, especially the Congress, who felt it was time for him to go, and at that point in time, there was no love lost.
That's true. Let me come on that particular one. Madam Commissioner, you are aware that power, be it a kitchen power, organizational power, is hard to let go. I think what matters most is in the final analysis, if these brothers who have been fighting each other come together, and again, what I said before, look at the interests of the country as paramount. That's what makes a difference. There are hundreds and thousands of examples the world over that you don't let power go very easily. Why would the power struggle that was between Mr. Tubman and Mr. Talbot, why did they exist for so long? Why did Mr. Tubman and David Coleman, one of the brilliant men I thought, because this is a man who, when the other people who have come here did not want to mingle that much with the natives, David Coleman even became, I think because of his association with my father rather, they were members of the Poorer Society. But why would Tubman, concoct something against his friend, David Coleman. Why would Mr. Henry Famula, who served so faithfully, Henry Famula Sr., served the government of Liberia so faithfully, be disgraced as he was because of power? Why would two brothers, two sisters, even fight for power? The answer lies in the fact that maybe the problem is we Liberians do not understand the political ethos. And that is, in politics, there are not, and there should not, there must not, there should never be prominent enemies or prominent interests. So when you're campaigning, watch your language. What you say, because you will come to haunt you. And because you may be talking to your sister or your brother. So whether in your view there was a fight on the floor, I submit, yeah, there may have been fight, but it was political fight. Because progressives don't believe that you have to compete in order to get it. It doesn't come on a silver platter. You cannot try to change the system that came apparently on a silver platter with another silver platter campaign or mechanism. I submit.
Two, three. Thank you, thank you. Dr. Dahn, thank you very much. Oh, I'll let you catch your breath and your drink. Thank you very much for your presentation. Many points were enlightening for me. I want to start off by just making a statement. I noticed you mentioned something about the $4 billion debt of the government. I believe that you felt somehow that they should be responsible. I wish to inform you that it seems that Liberia's debt in 1979 was less than 800 million, or less than 10 executive mansions, as you have just told me. Most of the 4 billion you see today comes from either interest charges or other fees that were added on during the course of the conflict period. So we ourselves are very interested in understanding about that under our theme linked to the economic issues of this country. So my first question would start, it's a common question I ask many people, so I just want to share, you get your input from it too. We know that PAL or PPP was a non-violent organization in a sense that served as a change agent in Liberia. However, in hindsight, do you still believe the actions of PAL, which turned to PPP, can be viewed historically as blameless under the laws for the coup of 1980? The core action I'm talking about is particularly that declaration of intent, which was mandating the government to commit suicide so that a new government could be established instead of using the democratic process of the ballot box, especially in the shadow of the Rice incident and the violence that it produced in 1979. Also, I'm going to give some statements that will help add some clarity to that question, and then at the end I will hope that you can give me your opinion. One first statement is we must remember that the old Truing Party government was under a new progressive leadership, already seeking to transform the archaic government system towards one of total involvement for higher heights. Two, the period of history when this event took place was a period of intense global struggle between communism and global democracy. So international pressure required most governments to show their allegiance, meaning if you're democratic, pro-democratic, you should be conservative at that time. Three, the progressive revolutionaries, maybe even the president himself, were perceived by the right-wing pro-democratic Truing Party authority as being pro-communist. Also, the progressive revolutionaries were making undue and untimely demands for change on a government already crippled and under international pressure to decide its loyalty, left wing or right wing. So, they decided to imprison the PPP leadership for treason. Now, many of the associates who got involved in this coup, like the coup plotters themselves, some of them have come and testified to us that they sympathized with those PAL or PPP people who were in jail at the time. That's what motivated them, in a sense, to carry out this coup. So when I put all of these things together, I just want to know what do you think? I mean, do you really think that PPP was just still blameless in this whole process and just, because we're concerned in the TRC of accountability of what happened and who's responsible for all of these things. So could you give a couple of sentences on that, please?
Sure. Thank you. I did not understand something correctly, and I want to get that before I begin to answer. Something to commit suicide?
Well, that was just a small joke, I'm sorry. In the sense that when you're telling the government, step down, you're too corrupt, you should step down and let us have a new government right away. It's not a normal process. It's like a strange demand you're making on the government to just kill itself and go for ballot box instead of waiting for the normal election process, which I think was scheduled that same year or maybe even the next year. So forgive me for my sarcastic comment there.
Because we did not send anybody out in the street to commit suicide.
No, I understand.
We were practicing our constitutional rights. And whether election was to come on tomorrow, it was left with the government to tell us that, okay, tomorrow 10 o'clock there will be elections. And therefore, we as rational human beings would then accept that and wait until the next day, 10 o'clock, for elections to happen. Your questions, your comments are pretty good in some areas, and some areas I'm a little bit uneasy to answer about that. Because there were sympathizers of the Progressive Alliance of Liberia. You got to remember that the Progressive Alliance of Liberia was a new kid around the block. For more than 140 some more years, there have been absolutely no opposition, and oppositions that came up were viciously squashed by the power that be. So for a very, very long time, there was no opposition to the government of Liberia. And to all of a sudden have these, quote, Gunan boys, unquote, coming along, it was a new phenomenon. It was a movement that people have to subscribe to. People subscribe to the movement because it was something new, something refreshing, something politically refreshing for them to say, hey, I can breathe free air. At least I'm a citizen of this country. I can tell the president you're not doing the right thing, and I can get away with it, and I'm prepared to accept the consequences of my actions. So it was something new. So whether we have members in the army, in the police, and we certainly did, okay, but we did not incite people to go and commit the crime that was committed or the overthrowing of the government that took place on April 12, 1980. In fact, we had achieved a milestone prior to that. I told you in March 1977, we have been registered as a legal political party to practice politics within the parameters of the Republic of Liberia. And so we rely very heavily on the Constitution. And I also mentioned that because of that, we did extensive research to see where we can get our voices heard. And we wanted first to start with a demonstration to reduce the price of rice, because first of all, this rice was coming in free of charge. Okay? And to have a monopoly on the rice, on the very people that you claim to be your precious jewel, we thought it was tantamount to a demonstration, tantamount to the abuse and suspension of our rights as citizens. So, if the soldiers, many of the soldiers, look, you have your family. We belong to ethnic groups, and many of the soldiers also have friends and relatives in the Progressive Alliance of Liberia, just as this current government, for instance, members, prominent members, were members of the Progressive Alliance of Liberia. I didn't want to name names, but they were. And I gave you two examples in the presence of the late Clarence Parker and the late Joseph Chelsea. Okay, so to say that their action was sanctioned by the Progressive Alliance is a little bit too, it's not correct. It's not correct. So, again, I think the country is in line, the question is in line with the other question that your colleague asked and I answered. Because we were progressives, we had brothers and fathers and mothers and sisters who were on the other side, just as it is today in the Progressive, in the United People's Party, in the Alliance for Peace and Democracy. You have members who belong to other political parties. And again, it's a free competition of ideas. And we are very proud that we give the opportunity to the Liberian people to choose to join any political party of their choice, which we believe is really a major change in the governance of this country.
There was only one question, the one about share blame. Are you saying that you all should share for that coup? That was my key question, really. The rest was just peripheral.
Mr. Commissioner, we are human beings. We err. Sometimes we want to make a decision that is not appropriate at a particular time, and that you come to realize that maybe you did not have enough information, but we did have enough information. So yes, we may have erred. Yeah, we take the blame. I take the blame. I said it in my deposition. I take the blame for the loss of life. The loss of life. And the destitution of our members that still continue today. But it was appropriate that somebody step up to the plate to bring about democracy, which is enshrined, the tenets of democracy, which is enshrined in the Constitution of this Republic. And if we see that, if the progressives see that somebody is trying to derail these democratic principles, this democracy for which many people are died for, we will do everything in our power to make sure that that person or that group does not succeed.
Thank you for the answer. It's very clear and direct. You mentioned something new, though, before I go to my next question. You said the rice that was being brought in at that time, that the government wanted to increase its price, was actually being given to the government free?
PL 480.
Okay, so
PL 480 was given free in the sense that $5 for 100-pound bag of rice. That was practically free. For the country, you got to remember this now, the country that was also, that had also been given the title to have the highest standard of living in West Africa, to be given a bag of rice for $5, it was practically free. So practically free relative to the wealth that was amassed here.
Okay, thank you. That's an interesting point for me too. The next one is a parallel to my first question, and I just asked everybody this question to get a general feeling. In your personal opinion, who do you think killed the late President Tolbert? Do you really believe that it was just those soldiers that were involved, or was there possibly any other linkage based on your research and understanding so far?
I am a researcher. I'm an analyst. And therefore, I do not believe what people tell me until I have some convincing evidence. So the only evidence I have, if you recall, I was not in the country when the coup took place. I was outside this country when the coup took place. The evidence I have is that the coup took place, the coup was carried out by 17 enlisted men. As to who personally killed President Tolbert, many scenarios have come up. But since, as an analyst and as a researcher, and I don't have the proper evidence, I would prefer not to call names or not to even waste my breath by telling you what I heard, because I did not have the evidence, strong evidence, to know exactly who killed Torba. So therefore, the coup plotters did kill Torba, in my view.
Thank you. Next one. In your opinion, what core factors led to the painful destruction of Liberia between 1990, after Dahn had died, and 1997, with the election of Charles Taylor as Liberia's 21st president? You know, the reason I'm concerned about this period is that most of the destructive things that happened in this country took place during that time. If the situation had just cooled down with Dahn's death, Liberia would have at least seen a very basically good infrastructural foundation to start a new beginning. So that's why I always ask many of our presenters this question. Could you shed light on your view?
A Greek philosopher once said this, that man by nature is a brute, and if given his own will, he will always prove his brutality towards his fellow men. Unquote. I believe with the situation between Mr. Taylor and President Dahn, you got to remember, and I think many people have told you this, giving you the story, that when the coup took place, Mr. Taylor and others were here on the fact-finding tour, sponsored by Torbert. Mr. Taylor was the chair of the Union of Liberia Association in the Americas. And so he, Barbara, the late Collins, the late Tangaba Jangaba Johnson, who used to be called Tangaba Johnson, they all came here, and they remained here when the coup took place. And Mr. Taylor became the GSA director. Along the way, again, they fell out. He and Dahn fell out. And so, because we understood, we heard at the time that he had been given something in the neighborhood of 900 plus thousand, or pretty close to $1 million, or even a little over $1 million, to go to the States as GSA director to purchase needed items for the government of Liberia. When the situation intensified, it got to the point that Mr. Dahn asked for the extradition of Mr. Taylor. And of course, Taylor thought that if he were extradited to Liberia, he certainly would not survive. Mr. Taylor got a lawyer. And this is where the story got a little bit more interesting. The lawyer he got was the former Attorney General Ramsey under Jimmy Carter, during Jimmy Carter's presidency. And so I'm not a lawyer, but for some reason I think Mr. Taylor was found guilty, and a deal was struck to serve his sentence in a Massachusetts prison. In the meantime, there were talks here by the government calling Mr. Taylor names, and all sorts of things were being said. And you know, as we all know here in Liberia, they say what makes a man shame makes him angry. It could be one of the factors. And so Mr. Taylor spent some time in jail. The federal prison he was in, those of you who know about the American system, it is impossible for anybody to break jail, particularly a federal prison. Nevertheless, that was the case with Mr. Taylor. So the feud between these two men had been going on for some time. So my understanding is that even though Mr. Taylor had come to get rid of Mr. Doe in order to set up a clean government. Of course, he saw that he needed more than that. Again, here I am one of the victims. When Mr. Taylor was in Banga, I had an interview with on BBC in which I said that if the intention of Mr. Taylor was to come and get rid of Mr. Doe because he felt that Doe was dictatorial and was vicious and abused his citizens, the best thing to do now was to lay down his arms and have elections, free, fair, democratic elections. And I believe then that if that were to happen, probably Mr. Taylor, with his popularity at that time, he would have won. He would have won overwhelmingly.
He wouldn't, or he would have?
He would have. Had he laid down his arms, no more fighting, no more destruction, to go for a free and fair election, I believe he would have won.
What time would that have been? What year? Or what month?
This was 1990 and 1991. 1991, particularly when Doe was no longer in the picture. That was considered tantamount to calling Taylor, who am I to tell him he should stop fighting. A friend of mine, Mr. Yasuo Waidolier, our village is separated by a river, the Yar River. And so since they could not get to my village, they burned down Mela, which was a big town. Yasuo himself was on the run. I had my niece, who was going to go to the States and had been accepted by the medical college of my alma mater. And his visa and everything was at the U.S. Embassy. This little girl was coming down after she had taken her mother and her siblings to Sacré-Pied, my hometown. She called me in Banga from the Catholic radio and said that everybody was saved on the other side. When she got to Banga, when she got to Kakata, she and I looked almost alike, very much alike. They called her, asked her, do you know who Marcus Dahn is? Innocently, she said, yes, that's my uncle. As a matter of fact, I'm getting ready to go to medical school. He said, did you hear what your uncle said on the radio? She said, no, what did he say? Well, to make a long story short, that girl never saw the daylight. The killer, he said, gone in her, pull her intestine out. We don't know where she is buried today. And so it got to the point that maybe Mr. Taylor saw that the only thing he can do was to be president of this nation through the means that he understood. That was through war. Even though we warned him that if he were to run as president at that time, 1990, 1991, he probably would have won the election. But he felt that he was strong enough to carry on what it is that he was doing. So the war intensified. We thought that the war, President Bush Sr. presented a 17-page document to him at the time. We thought that the war was getting to be like the war in Lebanon, in which you had different political parties coming on. We said that the government of the United States should try to stop this war before it mushroomed into different ethnic groups. But I think that period in question, there's a dangerous virus in the Liberian society. It's called sycophancy. There are people who make a living by this. They tell the president or they tell the leader, Chief, you're right, everything is correct. I mean, you got answers to everything. And they keep on propounding this saying into the head of the leader, to the point that the leader thinks that he is, in fact, or he does, in fact, have answers to the country's problems. And I believe this is what happened to Mr. Taylor. While it is true that he may have started with a different intention, the fact that he was compounded on a daily basis, that he has answers to all the problems, I think it helped him to do some of the things he did. You got to remember also why he was in Banga. He was visited there by none other than former President Jimmy Carter. Of course, Carter had gone there to try to persuade him to lay down his arms, and we understand that he accepted that request. But as soon as Carter left, the war resumed again, even at a more intense pace than before. But then the question to all of us is, why did he continue to fight when Mr. President Dahn was no longer in the picture? Because he said he had come to overthrow him, to get rid of him and establish democratic principle, or to have elections. He said because there were people who had been elected or selected to run the country when there are such a time elections could be held. I have no idea. Maybe that's a question we need to answer. But it's, again, it may boil down to power. And you know what they say about power? It corrupts. And it corrupts absolutely.
Okay, thank you. You've at least added some new points that I didn't know before during that period. Next, considering your opinion about Firestone and your past involvement with the NTGL and your present position as a current opposition member, right? You're one of the top people in one of the parties. I may be mistaken. Could you correct me?
I am the chairman of the Alliance for Peace and Democracy, the fourth largest party in the legislature.
Okay, so that's right then. So, and considering your current position in that area as opposition, what is your comment about the current handling of Firestone and its value to the Liberian workers? You gave a very good scenario on the past issue. We had a 100-year contract with these people, and during a time when our country was very young and virgin, growing and developing. We've gone through all that period. Here we are now on the verge of a new development. Rubber and plantation work is not complicated technologically, so it would seem that this would be an area where Liberia could become owner of this kind of simple industry. But yet, what are we doing? So, I mean, do you have any thoughts you would like to share with us as we look into the future of the country and considering your prominent position there as the head of this large party? Do you think that what is being done now is okay, or would you have another additional comment you'd like to add on how we can deal with this issue of the Firestone plantation situation and Liberia's ownership of it?
Thank you. Very important question. I am not satisfied with the current contract with Firestone. Considering the number of years Firestone has been here, the progress it has made, in my view, is dismal. Firestone, in this day and age, should be an exporter of rubber products, which should be able to make tires and rubber products in this country, considering how long Firestone has been here. But we are not. The last time I checked, we still send latex out of the country. It's a shame. Nevertheless, the current contract with Firestone is by far better than one that was done during the interim period. But as a progressive, I think that this current contract with the Firestone is probably 160 years late. Or shall I say since 1926. And so Firestone has got to do better and has got to do more and has got to do it faster. If you visit the Firestone plantations as we speak, people are still living in slums. Many of the workers, those who type the rubber, have no indoor toilets. They have no electricity, let alone pump water. And this is the 21st century. And Firestone has been here since 1926. Firestone needs to do better and faster. The name of the game is, I gave you 1.1 million acres of my land, you plant your rubber, you're making all the... I lived in Akron, Ohio. Like I said before, Akron, Ohio used to be called the rubber capital city of the world because of Firestone. And so the plantation mentality still prevails in the leadership of Firestone. Many times we hear, we read, and we see how management tries to downplay the importance of the workers. But I think that with the latest information, progress is being made. And let us not focus this on Firestone alone. Let's go a little further with the steel industry. Years ago, Bowman's, Lamco, Firestone, Mana River, all of these were making a lot of money in this country. Currently, you now have what is called bombing holes. Man-made lake left, abandoned. Lamco, that used to be called a small Sweden in Africa, is not a place that you can call where you have once this kind of big companies operating. Lamco's subsidiary in the US was Republic Steel Corporation. Steel industry in Chicago, which I believe was taken over by Metal Steel of today. It is the same steel industry that is now coming to man the Lamco mountains. There are other mountains in the neighborhood. Kitoma Mountain, never been touched. During the Samuel Doe administration, I happened to have been a member of a delegation that went to Guinea to negotiate the Guinean side of the mountain to use Lamco, the facilities, the railroad, and therefore Buchanan to export this iron ore, bauxite, and other mineral that they had in there. The deal was, I believe, worked out. And at that time, it would take about 55 to 60 years to mine the Guinean side of the mountain. And if that deal had gone through, Lamco would have been expanded, Buchanan would have been expanded, and so on and so forth. When the Metal Steel came into being, I was in this government, but I was in the interim government. I participated in the deliberations that were brought to my house, the documents that were brought to my house, with a lawyer, a representative, for Nimba and a friend who is now a lawmaker. We dissected the understanding of the Metal Steel deal, and we came up with some prominent suggestions, some of which the government of today incorporated in the negotiations. Among them was, since Nimba was the source of this revenue generating entity, the $3 million in question, 50% should remain in Nimba, 33% to Bassa, and 17% to Bond County for the rock crushers. We also requested that the deal between the dual government and the Guinean government at the time should be resuscitated, so that if you add 65 to the 55 that Metal Steel says is going to take to finish the Nimba Mountain, some of us will no longer be here. Even our great grandchildren will no longer be here. But it's a peek into the future. We also suggested that the same percentage as divided, whatever the percentage is to the government of Liberia, Nimba should carry, at least if they give 25% to the 3 counties involved. This is like a federal system. Certain percentage should remain in Nimba to take care of the hospitals, clinics, road construction, schools, etc. This, we believe, will go in line with the President's proposal that someday the superintendent of these various counties will have to be elected by the people. We also believe that if this 17% given to Bond will be used for the same intended purposes, whatever the percentage is left for the government, we believe then that the government can use it for national development. We also propose that LAMCO be the operational headquarters of Metal Steel, whereas Senegole will become the administrative headquarters, thereby giving a boost to that historic city. So this idea of Firestone should not only stop there. Any company or companies that are coming to Liberia, there should be long-term goal for development, long-term goal for education, long-term goal for health care, long-term goal to compensate the people in those counties. So while it is true that Firestone has done this one, maybe we can say maybe the current agreement is a very, very small step, but in the right direction. And I think it should be spread around even the logging companies as well. This is one other area that I have a degree in environmental science that needs to be addressed properly. Because I don't think we here understand the relationship between man and the ecosystem. For more than 45 years, the French cut down the logs on the south side or southeastern, northeastern side of Cote d'Ivoire. So much so that desert continues to encroach on Cote d'Ivoire and of course Mali, coming down to what is called the Guinean forest. We can go ahead and do the same thing here, but there must be some laws to protect the ecosystem.
Okay.
There must be some laws.
Thank you. I want us to, based on what you just said, you brought to mind something else. So before I go to my next question, I want us to talk a little bit about that point. You know, as I listened to you, you said not only Firestone, but also all the other areas, mining, etc. To me, one of our problems here in this continent as a whole is that we still haven't overcome this sort of slave mentality. What I mean by that is that really, who is the owner of these resources? that are in the ground right now. We are the owners, in a sense, the people of this continent. But yet, have our leaders had the mentality to realize that by having a parental mind and investing in your own people and in technology, you know, I'm an engineer, so I can understand this thing. So that you can take ownership. What the other man is doing, the investor that came to us the other day with X number of billion, he's going on the market, he's getting money, he's coming, he's doing something. What are we doing for the long-term development of our people to take ownership of our resources as compared to just living off the handouts of the little leftover, the so-called incomes, etc.? Has your party, for example, thought about these kind of issues, and is there any action towards a change? Because this to me is the real meaning of the progressive thinking, you know, that these kind of changes should be happening now, real, and not the violent method, but a realistic way to give ownership and empowerment to the real people of this country.
The progressives, you might believe, we do have a program called, which you are familiar with, MBO, Management by Objectives. Let me give you a little bit of explanation there. Since we make our tomorrows by the things we do today, and we're talking about the future of the children, we believe that a system must be put into place, and that system must be sold to the very people that you want to prepare their future. Once somebody takes an interest and takes an ownership in that system, he or she will do everything possible to make sure that that system succeeds. So first of all, define a goal. Define a goal based upon yourself, your country, the wealth of the country. In other words, customize a system that will take into consideration where it is you want to go. Be visionary, take risks, and prepare to defend that risk. For the youth, nowadays I, me and myself syndrome that we have developed. I think we should begin to think about the future for our children, not myself. It is precisely the principle on which the progressives usually stand. You're doing it for tomorrow. You're making your tomorrows by the things you do today. So I think with the current government, for instance, maybe we are on the right track, thinking about the future. But you don't think about the future in an abstract terms. Be a little bit more specific. Be visionary. And be prepared to take those chances in the interest of the people. To me, there's only one key that you can use. That's education. Because, again, as I said, for mankind, no country has ever developed if we don't have the educated mind. We should stop paying lip service to education. Teachers need to be retrained. They need to be provided incentives for them. Teachers need to have refresher courses. You need to have genuine universities and technical colleges. I want to tell you that I'm an expert in that because my dissertation focused on technical education. I can construct, design a technical college. When we were running our campaign, my platform in education was about 11-15 pages long. And I'm proud to say that some of the things that we had in there are being adopted in the current educational system. So education to me is a key. And we're talking about genuine education. I'm not talking about fly by night, for sale degree holders that we have running around here. We're talking about genuine education, technical education, individuals who take this country at heart and therefore would like to train other future leaders of this country through education. So that would be my answer to that.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So you're saying that real ownership will start by enlightening the young people, educating people to realize their greater value and let them take action.
Precisely.
Okay. Next, are you satisfied with the change or transformation which has taken place in Liberia between 1980 and 2003 with regards to this democracy and the liberation of the people from the selfish one-party rulership of the Chui party? I mean, it's finished now. I'm looking back at the past and the progressive vision and all the struggles of the 80s and the 90s, and here we are now in a new millennium with new hope. As you sit and think about it now on this platform, can you say that, okay, it's been done, we have done it, it's okay, or is there still some unsettled, feelings there or concerns?
No, I'm not satisfied. Democracy is a process. It's not an event. We have begun the process. Like any other country in the world, we continue to develop. You can't be satisfied and say, let's take the United States, for example. Say, I'm satisfied now that I have landed man on the moon. Or now that I'm exploring the possibility of landing on Mars. You can't be satisfied with that. You can only be happy that what it is that you had envisaged years ago is coming to reality. But it also needs to be nurtured. So, if I say I'm satisfied, I will not be honest with myself. But on the other hand, I am glad that the change that we advocated for seems to be coming about. Although, again, we knew that it was not going to be an easy matter, but we think rather, that it was going to happen. It did happen. And we are happy that we stood firm to make sure that it happened. The problem I see today with this change now that has been in progress since 2005, or go as far back as 1979, government CRZ was elected, and then Teda was elected, and then with the interruption of the war, other people came in between, selected, and now we have Mrs. Ellen Johnson sitting as president. But certain things that I'm still quite not satisfied with. In terms of the progressives, this newly found democracy must be nurtured. It should not let it be one of those things that you all praise and praise and praise, and sooner or later we have an imperial administration. Sooner or later, some people consider themselves, because of their association with the power that be, they consider themselves untouchables. Also, some people who, again, because of their positions, they misuse the trust imposed in them. Because I believe that this government is genuine. And if the government trusts you to appoint you to a position, you have to remember that trust is a two-way street. It flows from trustworthy people. So you have to remember the past. Clearly remember see that need to take place quickly. I'll give you a typical example. Look back here. This Jengade True Party building. In reality, there's my tax money there. Maybe True Party would do better as a way to reconciling with the Liberian people. Give the building to the government. Let the government renovate it and put in about 6-7 ministries. And stop renting from the very government who ran this country. That's a good way to start a reconciliation, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. Another point, you mentioned earlier about you being tortured during the course of this war period. I was wondering, would you like to clarify who do you think really carried out this torture against you? And did you ever make a statement to TRC about this issue?
The process, the war being the process?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier when you were giving us your general story that there was a time when you were tortured somehow. Maybe I misunderstood you or something. That has never happened to you? By one of the officials, or the minister's guard, or I don't know who, but was there a time where you were tortured by one of the governments?
Oh, you're talking about my early days, Bernard days. Well, you know, Honorable Commissioner, there are some stories that every time I think about what happened to me, I cry. And I burn inside because I know the injustice. Maybe there are two stories. Let me start back with the first one from PUA. You know, it was on a Friday afternoon.
I didn't want to, bring up a new foundation, but I was just wondering that it would be nice if you have such a background of suffering that you're a victim in essence of this war period, and you should give a statement to us.
But those are the two stories. They happened successively, 69 and 70. So I just want to give you a synopsis of this. Coming from work, I had 25 cents in my pocket. I bought 5 cents cup of farina, 10 cents, 5 cents, 10 cents lump of sugar, 3 lumps for 5 cents, and then 15 cents condensed milk. When ELBC had just received its outside broadcast, and they saw me and said, "Oh yes, a young, hard-working man coming." So they asked me for my name. I told them, and they said, "What do you think about this open door policy?" I said, "Open door what?" I said, "Open door policy." So I simply said, "Well, in my condition, I don't even know whether the door is open or closed. And my people up in the interior, they don't even know whether there's a house, let alone to have a door." Well, you see metaphors. By the time I got to Margarita Street area here, it was Dusty Road by then, where most of the low-level people lived. I was jacked up. They took my condensed milk, my sugar, stepped on it, buzzed it right before my eye, and I was hungry like nobody's business. I told you it was done by this time. See what I done, Campbell, and these people. That particular incident you're referring to was very painful because they were laughable also. There's a falling highway, two going to Cinco, two coming from Cinco. Mr. Smythe was ahead of me with his car. Stopped right in the middle. One on the other side of the lane, taking 2 lanes at the same time. I sat there for about something like 2 or 3 minutes, and all those who were in the car with me are alive today in this town, except my brother Westmore now, who is in the States. Waiting for 2-3 minutes, I passed on the side with the Volkswagen. And again, I was coming from work hungry. On about 10th Street, I heard a siren. And I tried to put my turn signal on. And it was a police director pointing a gun at me. Stop the damn car, or I will blow your brains out or shoot you. So at that point in time, I said, there's no one life to live. So I said, go ahead and shoot. So the director, he said, what did you say? I said, shoot. Brutalized me, took me to the police station with a rubber band the size of this microphone. I felt the first 5 lashes on my back. Subsequent lashes, no. I thought I was dying. They handcuffed me under the bench. And I got beaten until Major Wallace stopped the beating. What was my crime? And you have the nerve to tell me for improper overtaking the police director's car? I remember that police badge number. It was a private patrolman 49 who beat me. But I can't hold it against you. I hold it against the man who directed that I should be flogged for improperly overtaking his car. In either one of these cases, no charges. So I wanted to make that clarification. Is that a clarification you wanted?
Yeah, yes, I understand. Thank you. And you said it was in 1970 and 69?
Yes, 1969.
So it was
The other one was
outside.
1970, June.
So it was outside our mandate period. At least it reflects on the kind of things that was happening in the Truth Party at that Truth Party led government at that time. Okay, my next.
But no,
concern.
Commissioner, let me say this. Yes, it may have been outside of your mandate, but I give you a lot of faces earlier. The particle emotion will remain so until I tell you. All of these, and I also made a religious statement here, that you train up a child in a way that when he grows up, he will not depart from it. This was child abuse. This was child abuse. This was power being used at its worst. And so it built the anger in this child not to respect the system because the system was not fair. So I chose the opportunity to expose this system because I was a victim of this system. So that action from True Party impacted this reaction.
I understand. Next, were you a founding member of the independent MPFL headed by Mr. Johnson?
No.
Or did you just join at the end to sort of facilitate the peace process, serving as his spokesman?
I accepted the position because, again, it was one of the ways I felt that I could bring Mr. Johnson to agree to the peace proposal or to the group that had been selected in Banjul, but was not a founding member of INPFL.
Okay, so he sort of, your relationship, did you have a personal relationship with Mr. Johnson directly during that time, or he just asked you to do this work for him?
At the time, I did not have a personal relationship, but I knew about him. I remember in 1985, after the failed coup attempt, he was interviewed on BBC. And it was the first time I heard him admitting to the fact that he was a part of the MPFL, led by General Kumaba. So that was the first time I heard his name. And then later on I found out that he was also from Nimba. And during my research I also found out that he was a trained U.S. military person who had visited Fort Bragg in North Carolina. And so with a trained military person, we thought that somebody who understands the rule and then would be willing to see reason to lay down his arms. And that's exactly what my prediction was. It came true because he did exactly as we asked him to do.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering, have you ever affiliated or been connected to any organization that's participated in violent activities during this Liberian struggle?
If I ever been?
Yeah, have you ever been a member of an organization or affiliated with any particular group of that sort that has been directly involved in the violent application or arms issues within the Liberian struggle? I know you said that PAL did not have a violent approach. You were non-violent. But I'm just wondering, anywhere else during the course of the process, did you ever join or get affiliated with any group?
The group that I have associated with all these years is Progressive Alliance of Liberia, transformed into PPP, transformed into UPP, now transformed into Alliance for Peace and Democracy in a partnership with LPP. If you call that group a violent group, it's debatable. But I would tell you that's the only group I associated with. But to call that group a violent group, then of course I will have to ask you to give me the evidence. Because I made it clear earlier, the only group in my view that introduced, practiced, and perpetrated violence in this republic is the True Party. And I give you clear examples.
You mean from a political party point of view? Or just any group?
Personal and political.
So that means
personal and political. I gave you the story about my father who was collecting taxes for this government, for the True Party government. This was in the early 50s. And I was just a little boy. And they disgraced him, whip him by saying that he did not collect enough hot and hair taxes. How in the world did they know how many people were in secret mine chiefdom? To disgrace a man, putting down in front of his jailhouse, his wives and children, clan chiefs and the other people. You don't call that violence? I tell you violence. Then including myself, being beaten for quote improper overtaking. Come on. It's not violence. For saying that I don't know whether there is a door, because for some of us we don't know whether there is a house, so there don't be an open door. Is that something to beat a 15, 16-year-old man for, or young a child for, and throw it in jail with no reasons whatsoever? That's violence. Raymond Horace, what did he do to Tubman to deserve the humiliation? Where my former senior, what did he do? What did D12 do? What David Coleman did? Countless others. You don't call that violence? And subsequently, all the people who wanted to copy after Tubman, what did they do? I gave you names of individuals today. I used metaphor to give you those names. David Dwyer, Patrick Bido, Flomo, Moses Tupu, Jason Doe, Henry Zuo, Thomas Kwon by himself, Sekido, Tuoki. Where are they today? You don't call that violence? Those were Jason Doe, David Dwyer, SBC Ban, Towe. They were civilians. Why is it that we can't find them today? What carried them? Where are they? Is it not violence? No. So people who actually perpetrated the violence must come before the TRC to admit so that we can reconcile, because it's a two-way street.
Yeah, no, that's why I wanted to at least make sure you're off the list. So that's why I asked you the general question.
Okay.
Okay, next, the last one is, you mentioned about the transformation of PPP into UPP. Could you shed some light on why that was necessary? And also, what was the key thing that the dual government did to UPP at the time that made it difficult for you to run? Did he just ban you? Or was there something else that you would like to share with us? Because we saw how you made the supreme sacrifice to leave the government for the political purpose. So that's my last question.
You want to know how PL was transformed into UPP?
Yeah. And then what was that last thing that they did to you all that made you not
The struggle continues?
Yeah, with regard to the election of 1985.
Oh, 1985. All right, let me tell you, first and foremost, the Progressive Alliance is like a child. A child is born. The child is reared by the parents. The child grows up. The parent feels, in the American system, for example, when the child reaches 18 years of age, he or she becomes an adult. The parent has done everything possible for that child to grow up. Set it free. The child goes to school, learns. The cycles begin. With the Progressive Alliance of Liberia, when we became a political party, it was only appropriate either to keep the Progressive Alliance of Liberia or the Progressive People's Party. There was nothing sinister about that. And as I said, to honor one of our heroes, D12, when one of the founders, in the presence of Mr. Oscar Quia, proposed that name, it was overwhelmingly accepted. And so we had a progressive, the United People's Party. Again, well suited. We felt that if this party was to serve the interests of all Liberians, that name was very profound. It had profound meanings, and it was a name that every and all Liberians can identify with. The last question, I think I answered something like this. It was more political, because we did not know what it is or what it was that we did to cause. See, I don't want to say Mr. Doe. Once again, I got to stand by my principles and how I was educated, even though we knew that it was Mr. Doe. But the pronouncement about banning or first resigning was Mr. Doe. But the pronouncement about denying us the right to participate in the 1985 election came from Ambassador Eme Hammer. He was the Special Elections Commission or Commissioner at the time. So for a party that registered with the largest amount required, because I think at that time the requirement was something in the neighborhood of $250,000, and we registered with $325,000. Every grassroots in this town, in this country. At that time, we also had a savings bond scheme that Mr. Doe had introduced. used, collected their savings bonds. Everyone, people give their deeds to make up the $325,000. It was overwhelming. And we registered. So for a party that registered with the largest to be banned with no apparent reasons, a puzzle. Even a veteran political pundit. So to today, we don't know what it is that we did wrong that caused Mr. Hammond to deny us the opportunity to participate in the election. And so I can only say that, again, he was afraid of his own shadow. That had we gone through, I have no doubt in my mind that we would have won, because time was on our side, because people in Liberia knew what we had done to bring about the election. So that's the only best answer I can give you.
Technical Advisor Levitt, Dr. Levitt, has a comment at liberty to respond or refrain from responding.
Thank you, Dr. Dahn. I found your testimony to be very enlightening today, and I thank you for sharing these stories with the Commission. I have one question, because I sensed in your discussion a real passion when it comes to the question of impunity and injustice. And I would like to know what your advice would be, your view for the Commission that has the very difficult task of fulfilling the mandate of the TRC Act, and particularly on the question of the recommendation for amnesty or prosecution for those who have committed gross violations of human rights or humanitarian law violations. What would your advice to us be, and what, in your ideal world, should we do?
Thank you. You came to the right place. The following are not written in stones. First and foremost, I think the TRC is a very, very good entity. I support it 101%. But I think many Liberians seem to have forgotten the purpose and the mandate of the TRC. So therefore, a little bit more of education about who the TRC is, what it's supposed to do, is in order. Through newspaper ad, TV appearances, even though I have heard on a number of occasions your chairman alluding to that. But either because of the war or we don't want to face it, there's a tendency to quickly forget the reason for which an entity was established, or what an entity ought to do. You listen to talk shows and you hear some of the most outrageously inflammatory statements from individuals, clearly that they don't know what the TRC is all about, what it's supposed to be doing. So my suggestion in this regard would be, you need to re-advertise yourself. Let people know who you are, what you're trying to do under difficult circumstances. Secondly, the TRC did not come by osmosis. The genesis of the TRC will go as far back as South Africa. And interestingly, I was still living in South Africa at the time. In which years of injustice, humiliation, slaughtering of innocent people, outright disgrace of a man because of the color of his skin was perpetrated. And since they were all South Africans and all belonged to the same race, the human race, it was only proper to sit down as members of the same community. People who, despite their biological attributes, also had certain things in common. To sit down, hang head, and resolve their issues. It was a noble idea. President de Klerk also testified. Nelson Mandela had to testify. Many prominent people, particularly those who carry out vicious crimes, testify. So your mandate is historical. And you're talking about South Africa, which is more diverse community as compared to Liberia. 16 tribes, small country, not much difference. You also study from Sierra Leone, because Sierra Leone adopted the same system. And then Ghana. You see, there is no substitute for experience. So that we say you do have the experience. Even as we speak, Kenya may have its own TRC. Burundi already has its own TRC. So the TRC needs to remind the Liberian people again that it did not just drop from the sky. What its main purposes are and what it is that it is trying to do, I think they should be conveyed to the Liberian people, to the radio talk hosts, because sometimes they themselves ask questions that, for lack of a better word, are medieval and not helpful to the process. So here again, you need to sell yourself, because as the saying goes, if your house can't sell you, the public will not buy you. You need to do that. This is a very, very difficult task. But then again, nobody ever told you life would be easy. I commend you. The other thing that I think the TRC needs to do is to continue to ask people to be sincere in their presentation or presentations. Because at some point in time, and you're going to have to forgive me for this, some testimonies were like a circus where people give the blame to either the dead or their inability to get it through. And On the other hand, there were some people who tried to prove that they were within the loop, but yet again failed to tell you what was happening within the loop. And so when a question was posed, they say, yes, I was within the loop, but the angle of the loop, I didn't know, or we just talk, peripherally, thereby creating this circus mentality. TRC will have to be very careful not to be dragged into using it as a forum to try to justify certain heinous crimes that were committed against PRVs. The other suggestion I would have, Doc, is I think the mandate of this entity will have to be extended, because this is still just the tip of the iceberg, in my view. I have heard the chairman on the radio when a testimony was given and somebody outside the system or accused the person who gave the testimony as lies and so on and so forth. And yes, and I heard the chairman say that if you have a case against any one of these people who are giving testimony, the TRC is open to you. So I think TRC should encourage Liberians who think that Marcus Dahn may be lying to come and present the facts. And I think then that you will go and recheck that what it is that I have said is true or is not true, as corroborated by something somebody else is saying. So all of this cannot be done within the time allotted to you. I doubt it very much, because you're going to have to check and recheck, so that when you come out with a suggestion or solutions, it can be a solution that, or rather solutions that we all can live with. And therefore, inform the public. If anybody has a case, the person probably would like to present that case in camera or come to a forum like this, I think that will help solve the problem. The other solution I have is to the Liberian people, of course. What has happened in this country is a terrible situation. It's an intention. I'm talking about the war that the perpetrators may have had some good reasons for, but as men, that intention was derailed. And the only thing that we can do as men is to step up to the plate and admit the fact that we did this for whatever reasons, and express remorse. Pick up the pieces and try to move on as an entity, as a nation. But never again should we allow any group of people, whether a majority or a minority, to hijack the democratic process, to abuse, insult, and deny the the rights of others because you may have been born in a privileged class. Never again. Never again. Should we unmercifully, viciously torture people because of their political or ethnic affiliations? Never again should we deny anybody the right to be a Liberian. After all, whether you became a Liberian by naturalization 10 hours ago, you are as good as an 85-year-old Liberian who was born here. You should never, ever try to demean, castigate, denigrate another Liberian because of the class in which he or she was born. I think I'm looking at the TRC at the end of it all to come out with some recommendations. Some of us are willing to write some more, think a little bit more carefully, and write some suggestions. I have a funny answer, which is an addendum. I did some work for the TRC. I have not been paid yet. So I will take it up with my brother, the chairman, behind closed door. But I think I will stop there for the answer of your questions. I am open to make any detailed research and come up with some suggestions based upon similar programs in other countries as well.
Thank you very much. Our obligations are acknowledged, and we hope sometime soon we can have that resolved. But we thank you very much for your presentation and the time you've taken up to answer our questions. There's just one last thing you may mention of a communication presented to the Elections Commission at the time of the 1997 elections. I was just wondering if copies are still available and it could be served the commission.
Copies of the document that I collected.
Yeah.
I'm going to check my ex-wife. I think what had happened, I had it on the computer, and my computer crashed. I had on a floppy disk. As you know, floppy disk is no longer in process. But I think there should be a copy laying around. I'll call my ex-wife and see if she can do some checking, because I still have some books and documents at my house in Ohio, and we'll check that. I will also ask Dr. Dahn, because my writings and papers that I had, Dr. Dahn worked with one Dr. Stone from Indiana University, which seems to have or boasts of having the largest collection of African writings. So they asked me, and I agreed to use my papers for that purpose to the library. So I honestly, it's in time. I'm going to try to look for it and see whether he ever made a copy of that. I will do my best to get a copy for you.
And very briefly, did you, by your testimony, suggest that the 1997 elections was anything but free and fair?
Free and fair is relative. As I explained to you, when we landed here, or at least when I came May 31st, we were welcomed from the airport to near Mount where where he said he was supposed to stay. By gunfire in the air, of course. We had a series of meetings at the Unity Party headquarters, which is next to this new restaurant by the beach. It's next to that. Golden Beach. We had a series of meetings. We knew that the road to this election was exceptionally treacherous. We questioned whether it was not even fatal to try to make the attempt. And we traveled. Well, first, our example was on our way to Sani Kole, the honor of the late Jacinto necessarily wanted to launch a campaign in Sani Kole in honor of Jacinto and Dr. Kesari. Those were two bodies. We came under gunfire in Banga. I think Taylor was in town here. Nevertheless, we did launch the campaign there. It was extremely uncertain as to whether you would survive the next day or the next night. I had an encounter with Mr. Taylor, and many people have asked me this question. I have always tried not to answer it. And in my presentation, I alluded to it in a very minute way. I met with Mr. Taylor. He told me, he said, why is it that you never accepted my request to be my running mate? And this request came about when I came to bury my late brother Jimmy Dahn in March 1997. And we were going to bury him when Mr. Taylor was on a trip from Libya. He and my late brother were good friends. And he sent a message that we were supposed to bury Jimmy Dahn on Wednesday in Saclay. And he sent a message by the late General Azim Musa to me that he wants to see the body of his friend before I could bury him. He arrived that afternoon at 3 o'clock. Mr. Taylor and I had known each other for a long time through our student days in the United States, formation of the Union of Liberian Associations in the Americas. And apart from that, he and the late Moses Tobu were sort of like big brother in a way, because he married Moses Tobu's wife, sister. So they were buddies. So when he arrived at 3 o'clock on 11th Street, my old man's GR there, he couldn't come out to tell me exactly what it is he was saying, except to ask that I should stay. And I said, stay for what? And so, well, now you know. Later on, the next evening, this thing was really told to me by Dogolia. Dogolia even provided a cow which we sent to Saclay to be stored up for the the chiefs who were with him there. So in 1997, before the elections, I had an encounter with him. He said, what are you saying about my request some years back? I said, not some years back. I just reminded we joke. I said, I was here 1997, March. Is that the request that Dogoli had made to me? It was a little bit uncomfortable because I mentioned Dogoli. So he said, you brought a woman to run against me. So I said, but you were educated in the States now. This is a free competition of ideas. If you have a better idea than she is, I will take off my hands for you, to you. He just told me, again in a jovial way, and you made a request on BBC one time that if I were to run, I would win. I said, yes, that was that time. But not this time, because much destruction had taken place. So it can be fixed. I said, yes, but I will support her so she can fix it. She can fix it faster and better. It's alright, now you will see. Don't forget, your father was, because he always thought Jimmy Dahn was my father. Your father was the best friend I ever had. So nevertheless, I know you will come one day to work in the government. So yeah, coming to work in the government of my country, that's what I went to school for. So we laugh about it. And that's what the conversation between two of us. But before we departed, I told him something. I said, Mr. Chair, because at that time you were still chair of the board of directors of the Union of Liberian Associations in the Americas. I said, please tell your boys to give us the opportunity to run freely in our country. You're not going to get anything out of not allowing this election to go on. He said, oh, you mean somebody troubling you? I said, of course. You heard that we went to launch the campaign in Sunny Kure and what happened there? So these boys, maybe some trigger-happy loose cannons is the word used. We're doing this. So I said, well, all I have to tell you, Mr. Chairman, is make sure that we have free and fair elections. That's what I said before. Free and fair is relative. We had elections. I was really sincerely, despite the intimidation and the harassment, if we had gone the second round, I have the conviction that besides the statistical data that we had, my intuition also told me that we would have won had we gone the second round. But the regrettable thing was President Jimmy Carter, who was the chairman of the International Monitors, made an announcement. The announcement came on Kiss FM. And I think Radio Monrovia, and maybe a couple of other radio stations, that after my visit around Monrovia polling booths, Taylor is ahead 70%. That was on the 20th, 11 o'clock, July 1997. And it was very difficult to swallow. because at the time reports were coming in about irregularities, helicopter crashing with battle boxes, glaring example of irregularities marking battle boxes in Monrovia and in other areas where soldiers carry arms or fighters carry arms, intimidating people, all this kind of stuff. So I thought that was it. Because after that, the following day, subsequent days rather, as we know in the fund analysis, Taylor won by 73.33%. Mrs. Salib and others had to leave. I had a discussion with some prominent people in this town to tell them that this was not free and fair elections, but if it would in fact bring the carnage to an end, it will bring back our quote Liberianness unquote again, then there is always the next time. So will come a challenge Mr. Taylor again. Interestingly, I was also invited. I received my letter of invitation to attend the inauguration ceremony of Mr. Mr. Taylor. But the invitation came after the first information was that Musa had come to see me. No, the late Edward Sacco had come to see me. And he whispered something to me regarding that the busman heard that I was seen at the Elections Commission headquarters. So I needed to go and tell the busman that, I was not doing anything unpatriotic there. So I looked in his face. Do you think this will really suffice? He said, yes. About 3 days later, I got a letter of invitation from presidential invitation to attend the inaugural ceremonies, subsequently followed by dinner and the inaugural ball. I do take risks, but I take calculated risks. My intuition told me that this was not a calculated risk. So with the help of the late Dr. Vasi Salib, I left the country. Sorry, it's a long answer to your question, but there was too much intimidation, harassment of all kinds to describe the election of 1997 free. It was free for people to do what they want to do, free to go to the booth, or free to vote, no. Fair, no. So yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dahn, for your presentation, and of course, your candid responses to our answers. We have just come to the end of the testimony. I guess you said a lot, but normally we ask for a last word. If you so do have, please say.
The last word. I think the last word should be our first word. Sincerity. sinks and you think you can swim faster, you are sadly mistaken. We will play the crab game. You know what a crab game is? If you put a bunch of crabs in a basket, leave it open, now one will be able to climb up. As one climbs up, the rest will pull you down. In reality, Liberia is all we've got. Therefore, we should jealously protect it, respect the law, the government. I give you 3 purposes at the beginning. Provide public goods and services irrespective of the tribal affiliation, political affiliations. Preserve life and protect property irrespective of ethnic affiliation, tribalism. Promote equality. It is a reason why citizens render their rights to you. See, I was born in September 29 to be precise. I'm a Libra. You see the sun with a scale. That has been my life. Justice, not just us, should be promoted and maintained at all times in Liberia. Once we come together, educate ourselves and our children for the future, I think the sky will be the limit. You see examples in places like Ghana, but here in Liberia, the educational statistics is dismal. We still have about 70% of illiteracy rate. Where did we go wrong? Again, the leadership. Because they had the money, they had the power, they had the time, 100+ years, to reverse what was happening in this country. The leadership did well internationally to bring Liberia to the world's map, or put Liberia on the world's map. Creation of the Organization of African Unity, even the African Bank, the late Dr. Horton were very instrumental in that. But while we were professing to be a democratic nation, while our ingenuity was being utilized out there, things were getting exceptionally bad at home. Again, forgetting that if your home doesn't sell you, the public is not going to buy you. I think it's time that charity begins at home. Let's try to seek ye first the political and economic freedom and kingdom of this small, glorious country of ours, so that everything shall be added unto us. Thank you for the opportunity given to me. Thank you for letting us air our view. Once again, we are open for any invitation, whether on camera, public, writing, whatever, to provide whatever solutions we think can help us resolve the issues. See, I strongly believe that what man can create, man can also solve the problem. There is no problem so insurmountable that will be created created by man, and he cannot solve that. I'm not super religious, but I believe that God will never give you a task, will never give you a problem that he knows can't solve it. And so it's the case with us. Problems that we have created can't in fact be solved by us. We just need to sit down and game. And I think through that, the process of healing